Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Stories Between Us, where we analyze the psychology of the tragic movies and books we're going to be watching and reading. Today we're going to be talking about the different ways that characters grieve or process or cope with the loss that happens in the movies. Whether we see the aftermath or not, there's still many clues throughout the movies that shows how they cope, or we actually see the way they cope. With that being said, let's get right into the video. Oftentimes, we don't even see the aftermath of the loss that happens in the story, but we do get context clues on how they might cope with it. Other times, we do get to see it because that's the whole point. Like in P.S. I Love You, the whole journey is that she lost someone and she's reading these letters from them. First, we're going to be talking about the way they process grief. The first one we have is the denier. So there's someone who refuses to accept what happened, what is happening. It's not out of stubbornness, but it's out of survival. They stay moving, they joke, they strategize, or they distance themselves from objects or from people even, so that they never have to sit with the open wound of what just happened or what is happening. The denier becomes emotionally stuck and suspended in the moment before the pain hits. They might fixate on tasks or pretend everything is okay. They'll just avoid it entirely. It's similar to the avoider that we'll talk about later, except it's full-on denial instead of healing. Their arc usually comes from them actually feeling what they're going through, even if it breaks them temporarily. An example of the denier would be Scarlet Witch, when she created a whole new reality just to deal with the grief, but at the same time she wasn't entirely healing or dealing with it. She was just creating a reality where what she lost was still there. She was denying that it ever happened, and therefore being a denier. Another example, in a way, is Joy from Inside Out. We see in the whole movie she's refusing to feel sadness, anger, anything other than joy, because that's the whole point. But she also makes Riley do that, which makes Riley, in a way, a denier as well. And that arc happens when Joy realizes that you need sadness in your life to move on from it and to feel something. And that's what Riley's arc is as well. So in a way, Riley's story is Joy's story as well. Next, we have the romanticizer. There's someone who turns tragedy into poetry, and it's not because they want to, it's because that's the way their heart can handle it. They relive the memories, they inflate meaning, and attach beauty to the wounds. Often they get stuck idealizing the thing that was lost, whether it was a person, a memory, or even a different version of themselves, or all the above. They rewrite the past into something perfect, making healing even harder than it already is. And their arc is about learning to see the reality without stripping it of its beauty and the real goodness that happened with it. In a way, you can see this as Rose from the Titanic when she's telling the story. Although she does share the bad parts, so she doesn't have an arc, but she's still a romanticizer, just in a healthy way. Next, another example of the romanticizer might be Carl Fredricksen. Instead of letting the grief and sadness consume him, because of course he felt those things, he instead later decided to continue the dream and to make that part of their love story, since that's what their original plan was anyways. In a way, I would say that Carl is also a continuer, which I will discuss later. Next, we have the healer. They're the ones who tends to others' wounds and tends to their feelings instead of their own healing, and they speak softly, they reassure everybody, but they don't take care of themselves. They overextend usually and become the emotional backbone of every other character in a movie as they quietly fall apart. Their journey ends in them learning that tending to themselves isn't selfish and it's necessary for healing and growing above the tragedy. In their minds, falling apart means everyone else will too. An example of this might be Samwise from Lord of the Rings. We see him taking care of Frodo all the journey, but we hardly see him taking care of himself or considering how all of this is for him. Another example might be Nick in New Girl when he loses his dad. We see him taking care of his entire family for the funeral and hardly focusing on himself, and everyone else notices that. Then we see him actually start to feel a little bit and realize that it's okay for him to be upset about it too and take care of himself and do what he has to. Next, we have the collapsed. So this is a character who breaks immediately and completely. They don't deny or soften the fact, they just crumble. The tragedy hits them like a blunt force, and they cannot hide from it. These characters show the true rate of the moment, and over time they may gradually rebuild, and their vulnerability is often what reveals them the most. An example of the collapse might be Joyce. She knows full well what happened, even though everyone else is kind of not believing her, but she completely breaks down. She does everything she can, and it's very clear to us how it's affecting her, as opposed to her avoiding it or denying it. Another one would be Neytiri from Avatar. Whenever her planet gets destroyed or when her son dies, spoiler alert, we see that reaction full on, and we don't see her holding back, and that's kind of what the collapsed is. We see every inch of her feelings, and she's letting it out. Next, we have the rebuilder. They're someone who immediately or very soon after starts constructing something new, either whether it's a plan, a dream, a promise, a purpose, and it's because the tragedy demolished the original plan that they had, so now they're looking for a new one and starting to build it. Their instinct is to move forward and to keep working because they can't fix what happened, so they'll try to make something equal or better to what they had before. Rebuilding too fast, however, can become avoidance, and their arc is learning to rebuild with honesty rather than urgency. An example of this, healthy-wise, would be Tiana, who's starting to work and to build her own restaurant, that dream that she had with her father who passed away. She is determined to finish this dream that they had together so that she can feel closer to him, and sometimes that's what the rebuilder does. Another example might be Iron Man, or Tony Stark. We always see him building his tech whenever he's had a hard situation or lost someone. We always see him trying to distract himself, and this is when it becomes an unhealthy version of this process. Like we see in the third movie, when he finds out that he is dying, we see him starting to build to distract himself from it, and everyone somewhat notices, but that's a whole other topic. Next, we have the numb. This one is a little more rare to see, but it's the one who goes emotionally blank. They shut down. It's not denial, they just don't feel anything. Oftentimes this happens when your mind is trying to protect you, so they turn off the feeling switch and they become quiet, distant, and controlled. On the outside, they may look fine, maybe not, but they're internally disconnected. Their arc is about thawing and rediscovering the ability to feel without becoming overwhelmed by those feelings that they have. An example of this would be Bella Swan in New Moon. We see the months and months of her just sitting in the chair looking out the window after Edward left. And that's exactly the representation of numb. Next, we have the drifter. They're the ones whose identity dissolves after the tragedy. They no longer know who they are without what they've lost, or they avoid who they are. They wander, whether it's physically or emotionally, and their arc is rediscovery and finding a new version of themselves in the ruins of the tragedy. An example of this would be Simba. After his father died, he ran away, which would be physically wandering, and he forgets who he is, as his father states, "Simba, remember who you are." Another one would be Thor. After he's lost everything, we see him kind of lose who he is a little bit, especially in Avengers Endgame, I believe, is the movie. Next, we have the optimist. So that's the person who's always trying to find the good in the tragedy, even when things are looking dim, or they already are. They're not naive, they're just committed to hope as a survival strategy. They become a quiet source of light for others, and they privately suffer for the fear that if they stop smiling, everything will collapse. That, or they're really just happy people and trying to look on the bright side. Their art comes from learning that hope doesn't mean that pretending everything's okay. It means a mix of both looking on the bright side and feeling the things you need to feel. Oftentimes that's not the case. They often have a balance, but sometimes this can happen. An example of the optimist would be Cinderella, who holds on to hope even after her father dies and after mistreatment. Another one might be Elle Woods, though less extreme in the tragedy front. She still stays positive after the breakup and tries to get him back until she eventually finds herself anyways. Next we have the sacrificer. They're the ones who decide that they must pay the price for a tragedy, even if it wasn't their fault. They take responsibility too easily, and they take it too seriously, stopping their entire lives because in their heads, if they don't get to live, I shouldn't be able to live either. Their guilt becomes their compass, and they might give up opportunities, they may give up things they like, relationships, happiness. They believe they don't deserve them anymore because that person can no longer enjoy it with them. And their arc is forgiveness, not of others, but of themselves. In the book All This Time, we see this a lot with Marley, who stops trying to be happy and tries to stay to herself because her sister isn't there anymore. Another one might be Bruno, who gets blamed and still does blame himself for all the bad things happening, even if it's not his fault. He punishes himself by staying hidden away in the walls. Next, we have the Rager. They're the ones who get angry, distant, and cold. They don't care what happens to them at all. They may also blame themselves for what happens, but they cope with it more in a dark and angry way than the sacrificer does. Anger becomes their sole emotion and guide through life, and that's not how it should be. But they may look for trouble, or they may push others away. An example of this would be Dustin Henderson from Stranger Things. When he lost his friend, he seemed to get really angry and mad, and we see in that final season a lot of it, that he looks for trouble a little bit. He isn't his normal, happy, smiling self. Everything about him changes, and he's just angry and distant now. And part of this is pushing people away because he doesn't want to feel that pain again of losing another friend. So he pushes all his friends away, hoping that he won't have to deal with it. His arc comes from realizing that that's not going to stop the pain, and that feeling other emotions other than anger is really important. Feeling fear and sadness about it. In a way, you can say Dustin also went numb, but I'm going to explain later that not everyone has only one process. Another one might be Anakin Skywalker, who gets angry about his fear of losing Padme, about his mom. We just see him get really angry, and that's what turns him to the Sith, because hate leads to suffering. So he was angry and suffering, which is kind of what the Rager is. Next, we have the Continuer. They're the person who carries unfinished pieces of the one they lost. They follow letters, wishes, bucket lists. And this process isn't from denial, but it's the way they keep the love alive and to keep the person that they lost close to them. In a way, their grief becomes their mission. Oftentimes, they feel responsible for honoring the life that's gone, and sometimes this is a healthy coping strategy. Other times, it keeps them hooked on the past. In their arc with that is realizing that the things that they're searching for or reading are not chains but gifts, and they're meant to be stepping stones, pushing them forward, not keeping them stuck in the past. An example of this might be Miguel from Coco, especially towards the end when we see him continuing his great-grandfather Hector's legacy. Or is it great-great? Anyways, we see him continuing Hector's legacy and telling the world that those were his songs and not Ernesto de la Cruz. The next example would be Julie from Julie and the Phantoms. Although she started as an avoider, she was now a continuer throughout most of the series, playing the music that her mom would have loved, playing the piano again, and doing the things that they shared together, and continuing to keep that relationship with her mom through music. Next, we have the avoider. They're the ones who cope by carving out distance between them and others. They avoid rooms, objects, even dates. Basically anything tied to the person that caused them the pain or the loss. They're not exactly cold, they're just overwhelmed. And their home becomes kind of like a museum of untouched emotions or memories. Their art comes from learning that going through these memories does not mean erasing them, but it means freeing it. Moving on isn't abandoning the person or these things, it's survival. And confronting these things that you don't want to acknowledge or see can be a great way for growth and moving on. An example of the avoider might be Luke Skywalker in the last Star Wars movie with Rey? I forgot what it was called. When he was hiding out on the island for the longest time, leaving everyone else behind and trying to leave his troubles behind as well, just being on the mountain by himself, avoiding what had happened. Another one would be Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. After Gwen died, he avoided being Spider-Man because he knows that Spider-Man, or him, failed to save Gwen, so he felt like he didn't deserve that title anymore until he saw how much it meant to the civilians, and then he started becoming Spider-Man again, getting out of that avoidance phase. But before, he was definitely avoiding his superhero duties. So tragedy doesn't just change the plot, but it also changes the people. Their coping styles, the emotional logic, their sense of identity. While the archetypes show us who the character is, these coping strategies and the processes reveal who they are when the story actually breaks them. Including the hope, anger, sadness, memories. Studying these patterns shows us how deep emotional tragedy is. It shows us that grief has many shapes and many processes depending on who you are. People mold themselves into these shapes in order to survive. But these processes aren't a flaw or destiny or anything like that, but it's a starting point. It's a signal of what they need, and it shows them and other people what they need in order to grow and heal from the tragedy that has occurred. It kind of gives them a guide map of where to go next and what to do. And similarly to archetypes, no person has only one of these processes. They may start off as a denier and then go into an avoider. Or it could be a more drastic shift and they go from the numb to the rebuilder somehow. Grief is never linear, and no process is ever just one process. There's always ups and downs, there's always changes for what works for people, and it may go from unhealthy processes to more healthy and productive ones.
Inside these processes, there may be different coping strategies. Some of them might be obvious, some of them might be mixed in, it just depends. So the coping strategies, the first one is humor. Obviously, we all know what that is. That is sarcasm, jokes, just lightheadedness, just being more light about the tragedy that had occurred and trying to make it seem less dark than it was. Psychologically, it creates emotional distance. It's like a protective barrier or a buffer. It keeps overwhelming feelings at bay, making healing and dealing with it just a little bit easier. If it's a long-term thing or short-term, it doesn't matter. Humor activates the parts of the brain that are linked to problem solving and social connection. Because of this, it can temporarily soothe or calm distress. This can be either useful or it can be harmful. It can be useful when it prevents emotional overload, making someone functional, insane, but it can be harmful when it becomes a wall that keeps them from ever feeling anything bad, because bad emotions are just as important as, honestly, Inside Out has showed us. To them, it's if they can laugh, then they can survive. Next, we have avoidance, and yes, that is a strategy, not just a process. So that's like dodging the reminders of the loss, the people, the places, conversations even. And it reduces the immediate anxiety that comes across thinking about it. They shut out every single trigger that could cause them to think of this memory, and so they don't get as anxious. However, this can never give the brain a chance to update with the loss, and it keeps the pain unprocessed and frozen in time. Short term, it can be somewhat useful, but in the long term, it's overall unhelpful and not good for you. Relatively, what's avoided tends to grow and bubble up inside you, um, and get larger over time, making you possibly explode one of those days afterwards. Obviously, the next one we have is isolation. That's pulling away from people, your usual routine, going outside, you're just staying home or we're in your room all day. This is either used to sit alone with your emotions or to avoid them. Psychologically, it creates a controlled space where the person doesn't have to talk to anyone, they don't have to confront what happened unless they want to, they don't have to mask, they don't have to explain, they don't have to perform, they can just be them and feel how they feel or avoid their feelings entirely. However, this can remove the regulation that comes from connection and being with other people and having some people have empathy for you. A little bit of isolation can be good because it lets you breathe and be alone with your emotions in a healthy way, not for too long. But too much, it's just a trap and it can make you spiral and go down. And overall, probably not the best strategy. The next one is over preparation for them. What these people do is that they try to prevent future loss or prepare for it by planning every detail, thinking about everything that can go wrong, and just staying super vigilant and on edge all the time to make sure that they don't get caught off guard. This can give the illusion of control psychologically when everything feels chaotic. The brain oftentimes views planning as a way to reduce uncertainty because then it either tricks your brain or you're actually prepared for what's to come. In small doses, this can be useful, but if you do it too much, it can become fear driven, exhausting, and turn into perfectionism. In their mind, it's if they're ready, then nothing can hurt them. Then they have over preparation for you. So this is similar to the first one, except it's planning for future loss. Most of the time, it's for themselves. They ensure that everyone around them will be okay, and it may include isolation or pressure. We see that Hazel Grace did this a lot with her parents. She was always doing what would make them happy, taking her medicine, going to support group, and all that. So we saw that a lot with her. This also kind of gives the illusion of control. It even if they know they won't be okay, but it can give their life a purpose to make sure that everyone else is. Like the previous one, it can be useful in small doses, but harmful when it becomes an addiction, an obsession, and it puts pressure on the person themselves to be taking responsibility for maybe what the parents should be doing, like in Hazel Grace's situation. In their minds, it's if they can't be okay, then maybe their family can. And the last strategy we have is clinging. And it's not only clinging to people, it could be to routines or memories or objects. It makes them feel less alone or they don't want to feel untethered, so they hold on to something or someone. This might soothe attachment wounds and it reassures the person and the nervous system. However, this can blur boundaries and prevent a healthy independence. It can be useful if it fosters a connection, but it's harmful when it becomes a desperation or emotional attachment so much that they depend on them for everything or they don't know how to live or move on with their life without them. It's basically the moment of please don't leave. I can't lose anything else. I need you in my life, which in ways is important to have someone, but you need to have a healthy relationship with them in order for that to be helpful. This may another strategy we have is hyper independence, and that's basically refusing anyone's help, saying they can do it alone, actually insisting on it. This protects self-esteem, and it creates a sense of strength, but it often hides the fear of relying on other people if they leave as well. So basically the opposite of clinging as a strategy. To them, they won't ever let anyone in again because of what happened. And overall, that can be really harmful because then they won't have any connections because they've pushed everyone else away and they won't accept help. Another one is emotionally shutting down or being numb. Oftentimes, this can be controlled, but they still emotionally shut down, not feeling anything, whether it's good or bad. Oftentimes, this is a survival response from your brain. It basically reduces the emotional overload so that you can live your life a little easier, even if it does not feel like it. In a way, this can be helpful, like immediately to prevent overload, but eventually you have to let your emotions in and feel them, even if it's just little by little, because otherwise it can prevent recovery. Next would be seeking meaning. It can be them asking a bunch of questions. What does this mean? Why did it happen? Was it my fault? It helps transform the pain into purpose. This is one of the strongest and most common healing mechanisms that we have, though sometimes it can be harmful if it's not done in a good way. Because eventually it could spiral into guilt, but most of the time there's not really harm in it. It's just more being careful not to spiral into a dark place and guilt. Because our brains, they most of the time want to understand it. We want answers. We want to know why this is happening, um, what caused it. Our brains constantly are curious and searching for answers as to why certain things happen, how we feel about them, and why we feel that way about them. The last one we have is clinging to normalcy. It's basically trying or doing ordinary things that maybe you wouldn't have normally been able to do, or just normal everyday things like scrolling or making tea, joking. Oftentimes, this anchors the brain to familiarity and helps it maybe calm down. It can give the brain a sense of reality and normalcy when everything seems to be going out of control. Oftentimes, this would be useful because, especially in the moment, it can prevent panic attacks or anxiety attacks, and it stabilizes the nervous system. Otherwise, it can just turn into avoidance, which is not a good strategy or process. Overall, coping mechanisms aren't good, nor are they bad. They're just survival strategies. Every one of them was originally formed to protect us, whether it feels like it or not. Most of the things are no different from each other. They're all a shield for the safest parts of ourselves. They're meant to protect us from what felt or still does feel dangerous and like a threat. And like I've said multiple times in this video, no person only has one strategy or one process. These are all usually a jumble of things that happen throughout the grieving processes. One day you could be avoiding and isolating, and then another day you could be rebuilding and being the continuer. That's why there's the 5 stages of grief, because it's not just linear. There's ups and there's downs, and you have neutral days, you have good, you have bad days. And overall, all these things could be bad to use or good to use. It could even just depend on who you are. If you're a very social person, isolating is probably not the best idea for you. But even so, too much of any of these strategies is not good for you. You need to have a balance between feeling your emotions and healing from them and trying to cope at the same time. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning about the different strategies and processes in the grieving process that these characters might use. And be sure to check in next Saturday for my next video. That's going to be talking about one very important line that I noticed in Fault in Our Stars. For now, I will see you in the next video. Bye!